Just before her death, the former Graceland maid who spent a decade inside Elvis Presley's inner circle finally broke her silence. And what she said left fans stunned. For over 40 years, Nancy Rooks protected the king's secrets, refusing to speak about what really happened behind the closed doors of Graceland. But now her final words are making headlines. "It's time to tell everything," she said. And what followed wasn't the warm tribute people expected. Before her death, the former Graceland maid finally revealed the truth about Elvis. And it's not good. What did she see, and why did she stay silent for so long? Life inside Graceland. Before the world saw Elvis Presley as a legend, Nancy Rooks saw him as a man. She didn't meet him under flashing lights or sold-out arenas. She met him in slippers, yawning in the kitchen, asking if there was any bacon left. Nancy was hired in 1967 to work as a maid and cook at Graceland, but her role quickly expanded into something far more personal. Over the years, she became a quiet fixture in Elvis's private world, someone who witnessed everything from casual breakfasts to emotional outbursts behind closed doors. Graceland wasn't just a mansion, it was a maze of moods. Some days, Elvis would be quiet, lost in thought, pacing through the halls at 2 a.m. Other days, music would fill the house, and Nancy would find herself singing along with him in the kitchen. Gospel music was his favorite. He'd belt out "How Great Thou Art" without hesitation, then smile when Nancy joined in, towel in one hand, frying pan in the other. He was famous to the world, but to her, he was just Mr. Elvis. He always said please and thank you. That's one thing Nancy never forgot. He was raised right, she'd tell people later. No matter how chaotic things got, whether it was a phone ringing off the hook or the constant stream of people coming in and out, he treated her with respect. But that didn't mean life at Graceland was simple. Nancy worked odd hours, often late into the night, to match Elvis's unpredictable schedule. If he was up at 3 a.m. wanting bacon, biscuits, or sweet potato pie, she was there, apron on, ready to make it happen. She did far more than clean. She helped him with his pants, sometimes while he was still wearing them. She laid out his clothes, arranged his personal items, set up his pool area, and adjusted to an environment where day and night often blurred together. Elvis's life was anything but normal, and Nancy adapted without complaint. But she saw more than anyone realized. Years later, she'd write a memoir called Inside Graceland, Elvis's Maid Remembers. It was filled with affection, humor, and soft-spoken memories. Never scandal. Never judgment. But even then, she held certain things back. She admitted this in quiet interviews. There were details she didn't think the world was ready to hear, things she promised she'd keep to herself for as long as she could. Not out of fear, out of loyalty. Even so, fans hung on every word she shared. They wanted to know how Elvis behaved off stage, what he liked to eat, what he wore when the cameras were gone. Nancy provided just enough to keep the curiosity alive while still protecting the man behind the myth. She'd recall how he was obsessed with cleanliness, often showering several times a day, how he liked his bacon fried hard and his eggs scrambled just right, how his eyes, even in exhaustion, always scanned the room like he was searching for something he couldn't quite name. The important thing Nancy gave the world wasn't trivia. It was perspective. Through her stories, Elvis became human again. Not an icon, not a punchline, not a tragedy. A man who laughed, cried, ate too much, and sometimes didn't want to talk to anyone for hours. A man who, despite his fame, kept a small circle close. And in that circle, Nancy Rooks held a place of quiet importance. She never tried to make herself the center of attention. But near the end of her life, as time grew short, that changed. She started to hint that there were still truths left untold. Pieces of the story she'd kept locked away. And when she said, "It's time to tell everything," those who knew her best began to wonder, what had she been carrying all these years? What did she see in those final days that she chose to keep buried? The morning of August 16, 1977. It started like any other morning, or at least that's how it seemed. Elvis had been up late, as usual. Racquetball with Ginger Alden, his fiancée, and his cousin Billy Smith was how he wrapped up the night, or technically, the early hours of August 16, 1977. When he walked back into Graceland, Nancy Rooks was already in the kitchen. She remembers him standing there on the steps, tired but polite as always. She offered him breakfast like she always did. "No, I don't want anything to eat now," Elvis said. "I just want to get some sleep. But what I would like to have is some water." Nancy didn't think much of it at the time. It was hot that night, and he'd just been active. She sent Pauline, another maid, upstairs with ice water in a jug, the kind orange juice used to come in, with a handle you could grip. It wasn't a big moment, just another quiet exchange in a house full of them. But even then, Pauline found something odd. Elvis grabbed the jug and drank deeply, fast, desperate. "I ain't never know him to grab that water and drink it like he drank it this morning," she said later. Nancy brushed it off. "He's probably just tired from racquetball," she replied. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the moment stuck. Around 9:30 a.m., Nancy heard a loud thump from upstairs. Not a crash exactly, but something that didn't sit right. She paused, waited, listened, but there were no screams, no calls for help, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence you convince yourself is nothing. And so she went on with her chores. It wasn't until nearly 1:50 p.m. that the intercom rang. Ginger's voice was shaky, nearly unintelligible. "Who's down there? Something bad has happened up here." Nancy's blood ran cold. "What is it?" she asked. Then Ginger started crying. That's when Nancy knew it wasn't something trivial. It wasn't broken glass or a slipped fall. Something was deeply wrong. She dropped the phone and rushed up the stairs herself, heart pounding with every step. She turned down the hallway, then into the dressing room. And there, on the bathroom floor, was Elvis, face down, unmoving. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is this?" She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She ran back downstairs and found the Memphis Mafia. Everyone who needed to know fast. But as the realization set in, chaos slowly replaced confusion. The ambulance was called. People started to panic. Nancy didn't. When the medics arrived, they were unsure how to even navigate Graceland. Nancy led them, showed them how to get the stretchers up the staircase, over their heads, through the tight angles of the hallway. She showed them where to turn, where to go. When they finally brought Elvis down, she saw him one last time. He looked just like he was asleep, she later said, but he had passed some time earlier. He had blue spots on his face. Everything after that moved fast. Sirens, news trucks, crowds. The world had lost Elvis Presley. But Nancy had lost Mr. Elvis, the man who once asked her to hem his pants while he stood there cracking jokes. She stayed in the background as the story exploded across headlines. The official word was cardiac arrest. Nothing more, nothing less. But even then, some things didn't sit right. There were whispers about pill bottles, about timelines, about what really happened in those final hours between the time Elvis drank that water and the moment Nancy found him on the bathroom floor. At the time, she said nothing, just held it in. Let the authorities handle what they needed to handle. But decades later, she would revisit that morning again. And this time, she wouldn't stop at what she saw. She'd talk about what she suspected, what she regretted, and what she may have covered up without even realizing it, the secrets she kept for decades. 4 years after Elvis's death, Nancy Rooks kept quiet. Not because she didn't have something to say, she did, but because there were lines you simply didn't cross. Not in Memphis. Not when your life had been touched by someone like Elvis Presley. She had seen fans travel thousands of miles just to stand at the gates of Graceland. She'd seen people sobbing when talking about the king as if they had lost a brother, a friend, a piece of themselves. Nancy understood that grief. She shared it. And maybe that's why she chose silence over speculation for a while. But even silence can speak volumes. Nancy continued working for the Presley family after Elvis died. She helped transition Graceland from a home into a museum. But there was one part of the house that remained untouched by tourists, reporters, or even most staff, Elvis's private quarters upstairs. According to Nancy, the bedroom and bathroom were cleaned only once or twice a month to keep the dust away. It was a silent rule. No lingering, no questions, no commentary. You go up, you clean, you leave. But every time she walked through those rooms, something in her shifted. She saw the same floor, the same hall, the same bathroom where it all ended. And every time she wiped down a surface or folded a shirt, the images of that morning would return. She rarely spoke about it publicly, not in detail. The memoir she eventually wrote in the 1990s, Inside Graceland, Elvis's Maid Remembers, was filled with kindness and nostalgia. There were funny stories about his food preferences, his music, his strange hours. But the final chapter, the one people were truly desperate to hear, remained curiously vague. For the public that was enough. But to those who knew her well, Nancy had moments, small ones, hints. She would pause during conversations when certain topics came up. Her eyes would drift. Once she reportedly said, "If people knew what I know, they'd never hear his music the same again." It wasn't a threat. It was a weight. In the years that followed, more questions began to rise. Why was there so much confusion about the timeline of Elvis's death? Why were multiple prescription bottles allegedly removed from the scene before investigators arrived? Why did the toxicology report go through so many revisions before the public saw a finalized version? And why did people who were there, like Nancy, never clarify those gaps? The truth is, she had tried, quietly, discreetly. A few close friends claimed she'd confided in them over the years, always asking they keep it between themselves. She said there were things in that bathroom that shouldn't have been there, things Ginger was too distraught to explain, and things the Memphis Mafia didn't want police sniffing around. One of the stories even suggests that Nancy was told to tidy up the space before paramedics arrived, though she never confirmed that herself. But time wore her down. Not in bitterness, Nancy wasn't bitter, but in burden. And when she was diagnosed with health issues in her later years, something shifted. In one interview just a year before her passing, she said, "I did my duty for the family, but I think someday before I go the truth needs to be told." It wasn't a threat. It was a release. People always assumed Nancy told everything in her memoir. But what if the most important part was the one she left out? What if she saw more that morning than she ever admitted? What if her silence wasn't just loyalty but guilt? Because decades after Elvis's death, Nancy's final words began to take on a new tone, not one of fond reflection but of urgency. She'd spent her life honoring the man she worked for. But in the end, she hinted that protecting his legacy may have meant hiding part of the truth, and that she was no longer sure was the right thing to do. The last confession. Shortly before her death in 2022, Nancy Rooks made a quiet but startling admission. She didn't shout it from the rooftops or issue a press release. That wasn't her style. But those who knew her, really knew her, say that in her final months something changed. She grew more reflective, more direct. And then one day, she said the words that no one ever expected from the woman who had kept Elvis's secrets for over 4 decades, "It's time to tell everything." At first, the people around her didn't know what she meant. But it became clear that she was finally ready to unburden herself. Not for attention. Not for drama. For peace. Nancy had always defended Elvis publicly. She told the sweet stories, the charming memories, the bits of personal routine that made fans feel closer to him. But what she hadn't shared, what she had locked away, was what she suspected really happened in those final days. According to one friend, Nancy confided that Elvis had not been well in the weeks leading up to his death, far beyond what the public had been led to believe. He was struggling. She reportedly said he was tired of the medicine, tired of pretending. She went further. Nancy claimed that some of the medications Elvis was taking weren't even prescribed for him or were being passed around by those close to him without proper oversight. She said she saw new bottles in the trash almost every day that summer, and even mentioned that on more than one occasion Elvis had fallen asleep in odd places, mid-conversation, mid-meal, even mid-sentence. At the time she thought it was exhaustion. Now she feared it was something much more serious. Nancy also opened up about something she'd never discussed in public: what happened just after Elvis was found on the bathroom floor. When Ginger Alden called downstairs sobbing and said something bad had happened, Nancy rushed up as always. She saw Elvis's body face down, unresponsive, and froze. Then instinct kicked in. She ran back down to alert the Memphis Mafia. But before the ambulance arrived, someone, Nancy never said who, told her to clean up just a little. At the time she didn't question it. She wiped a counter, moved a towel, straightened a few things. It felt harmless. But later, when the media storm began and when questions about pills and timelines arose, she realized what she might have done. "I didn't know what I was covering up," she reportedly said. "I just did what I was told." These moments, the water he drank too fast, the thump she heard that morning, the brief effort to tidy the scene, had haunted her. For years, she convinced herself it didn't mean anything. But in her final months, she wasn't so sure anymore. And that's when she told someone the thing she never said out loud in her book. The thing that now reframes everything: Elvis didn't just die. He faded. And no one stopped it. That line stuck. And it's why, in the final days of her life, those closest to her say Nancy seemed burdened. Not by what she had done but by what she hadn't said. By staying silent, had she helped protect Elvis? Or had she helped protect the people who let him slip away? And now, with those words, it's time to tell everything. The conversation has shifted because before her death, the former Graceland Maid finally revealed the truth about Elvis. And it's not good. Not because he was a bad man, but because the people around him may have failed him. Because there were signs. And because Nancy, in her quiet way, had seen too many of them, and spent too long pretending she hadn't. The fallout nobody expected. When word began to spread that Nancy Rooks had left behind more than just a cookbook and a few warm memories, the reaction wasn't immediate. It crept in quietly, like the way she'd always moved through Graceland, present, observant, but never loud. But once people realized what she had said, or at least implied, the shock began to ripple. Fans were divided. Some refused to believe it. To them, NY's memoir was gospel. Simple, loyal, uncontroversial, a final tribute to a man they believed in. But now that same loyal housekeeper was being quoted as saying Elvis didn't just collapse, he faded. And worse, that she might have unwittingly contributed to a cleanup that softened the scene for authorities. The idea that anyone close to Elvis had tampered with evidence, even if unintentionally, opened old wounds. The official cause of death had always left room for doubt. A sudden heart attack. Yes. But the cocktail of medications in his system, the delayed ambulance call, the lack of a full unredacted toxicology report, all of it returned to the surface with renewed fury. Online forums lit up with speculation. Longtime Elvis researchers and biographers scrambled to reassess the timeline. Had Nancy really been told to clean something up? What exactly had she seen that morning? Why hadn't she come forward sooner? And who, if any, had warned her not to? Others, however, praised her. They saw her late-in-life honesty as a final act of courage. After decades of protecting the Presley legacy, maybe she realized that truth and respect weren't mutually exclusive. That fans deserved to know Elvis wasn't immortal. That even kings crumble, sometimes slowly, sometimes in silence, and often with the help of those too afraid to step in. The Presley estate remained quiet. No statements were made. Graceland continued to run its tours, sell its merchandise, play its music. But the staff who'd known Nancy, those still working behind the scenes, whispered that things felt different now. That a line had been crossed, not out of betrayal, but out of love for the man who once called them family. For Nancy, there was no media tour, no interviews, no best-selling tell-all. Just a few words spoken softly, passed along by people she trusted. And those words hit harder than any headline. She didn't need to accuse anyone. She didn't need to name names. All she did was tell her truth. And that, it turned out, was enough to make the world look at Elvis's death and life with fresh eyes. Not as a simple tragedy but as a slow unraveling that too many people saw but no one dared to stop. Nancy had lived her life in the background. But in death, her voice finally took center stage. The weight of what was left behind. In the end, Nancy Rooks didn't leave behind scandal. She left behind questions, quiet ones, heavy ones, the kind that sit in your chest long after the headlines fade. She had no intention of destroying anyone's legacy, least of all Elvis's. If anything, she wanted to preserve the man she knew, the one who sang gospel in the kitchen and asked for his bacon crispy. But truth has a way of creeping through even the most carefully protected stories. Nancy never claimed to have all the answers. She wasn't an investigator. She wasn't a doctor. She was a maid, a cook, a witness to something larger than herself. But that's what made her voice matter. She didn't need to exaggerate. She didn't need to invent anything. Her truth carried weight because it was grounded in routine, because she was there. And when she finally said, "It's time to tell everything," she wasn't pointing fingers. She was acknowledging that silence can sometimes feel like betrayal, even when it's done with the best intentions. For decades, Nancy believed she was honoring Elvis by keeping certain moments to herself. But the older she got, the more she realized that honoring someone doesn't mean pretending everything was fine. What remained after her passing was a complicated portrait not just of Elvis, but of the world he lived in, a world where prescriptions were handed out like candy, where people were afraid to question routines, where even the strongest voices around him didn't always speak up when it mattered most. Fans who once believed they knew the whole story were left with a new layer to consider. Not because Nancy exposed some secret conspiracy, but because she revealed what it meant to live in the aftermath of someone else's downfall, what it means to carry guilt for what you didn't stop, even if you didn't fully understand it at the time. Nancy's final reflections weren't a rebranding of Elvis. They were a reminder that legends are human, and the people who serve them are too. That grief can twist into silence, and silence can stretch into decades, and that sometimes telling the truth isn't about exposing someone, it's about releasing yourself from a story you've had to carry alone for too long. Now Nancy is gone. The woman who folded his shirts, who brought him water that final morning, who showed the paramedics the way upstairs, is no longer here to clarify or explain. But her voice lingers, in quiet admissions, in unfinished sentences, in the decision to speak up just once before the end. And that may be the most powerful thing she ever did. Do you think Nancy Rooks waited too long to speak up, or was her final confession the only way to truly honor the man she never stopped protecting?